This is our test room that we use to be able to spawn enemies in of any different kind. It's not pretty, but it gets the job done. I'm going to give myself, full resolve here. And the move that I wanted to show off, I'll put it in slow motion so we can see, what it does. And unlock all the weapon upgrades. So is this one? It's the hammer and chisel, first super move, where you have the foundling coming out and shooting things in all directions. And then in the end, you get your shell back. So I think it's visually, it's a pretty cool move, which is why I chose, this one to show off.
Okay, so here's our character, which like now he has all these lights activated, but when I was trying to experiment with the light rigs, my main goal was to like change those light settings, make them like stronger or weaker, and change the color temperature, and maybe also just the fog, because like for instance now this fog works fine, but like in one of the other levels that I'll be showing, we needed to have one certain fog settings in one part of the level and other fog settings in other part of the level, and these things essentially do that. So like if I run into this volume, you see like the lights become super blue, and I made them like super strong here for the reason of showcasing this, and the fog becomes super dense. And if I run to another trigger, the lights change to like super hot, and the fog changed back to how it was before. And we would place those triggers on the actual levels, and they would activate when needed, like next to certain entrances and whatnot, and they would change the lighting conditions for the character. And I'll show one of those examples, like where we actually use that stuff in one of our levels. So
yeah, and this was a really cool example of how I think of the kind of like whoever asked, when to use blueprints.
Yeah, and like this is one of the examples where we actually used it, and this is an example of like why the character lighting was problematic. So like here everything is covered in snow and ice, and like character looks super dark for this type of environment, because normally the light would be reflecting from snow and casting everything to the character, or at least we would have like the light samples done correctly in this if we would bake this map, so the character would be actually be way brighter. But it's not the case for us. So like if I just spawn the character like here, like this in here, he's super dark. And but like I have a rig volume over there, like at the end of this corridor, and so like if I go in there and just stay here for a little bit, you can, I don't know if like it's super visible on the stream, but you'll be able to see that the character becomes way brighter because we're adjusting the setting for the light, and we're also adjusting the setting for the fog at the same time. And now, like we also specifically wanted fog to be stronger in this like cave that is going down, so that's another thing. And now I have this like working the way I want it to work, and I was also like to adjust the color of those light rigs so it's bluish to reflect more of what's happening outside, right? And the character is also brighter, it's not as dark anymore, and it kind of works. Maybe it's not like the most efficient or the best way to do this, but this is what I found working for us, and we use it like throughout the entire game pretty much. And if we like go inside that blueprint, it's really straightforward, pretty easy. It basically, I'll try to open it now. It basically goes in, checks if the character like has the checkbox, because like we didn't want this everywhere, so sometimes the character would not have the light rig checkbox on, and in that case like it wouldn't work at all. But if it does, it basically goes in, searches into the character to just add a little bit of extra kick in a spec, or so it like everything looks more wet and shiny. And they are on separate channel too. So yeah, they only affect rocks and the character. And then skylight is the one that is doing the majority of the job there. And the reason we actually added it, like it was even working without the character lights in here, with the dynamic lighting. I'm gonna show that quick. So when we would first make this thing, it would be like this, but everything was looking a little bit flat. And we wanted to, like, even the metal, like you can see it, it's metal, but it's not like shiny enough. And like the reflection probes wouldn't work as they should be working, like when you bake the light. So we had to cheat it in a way, and this is how we made this extra directional lights that only light the characters and some of the rocks. And I think I don't remember if for this level we use it, but yeah, for this level we didn't use like any special map. It was just like a normal highlight that would capture everything that is in the level. Then in some of the levels we would change this to like special type of a cube map to add like extra reflections or extra specular. And like I think let me try to open one of the levels that I think is the case, and the difference is quite drastic if we don't use that thing. Try to open that level now, because on the cathedral, I think we internally call it cathedral, where the obsidian rocks are. Everything is super reflective, and we just needed to, like, apart from everything else, we just needed that extra information in reflections that we couldn't get from just having the skylight as we have in Fulgrim. And I think we just used the map there. And then, like, essentially the lighting setup is the same with the skylight. There we have also a sun. Then the light rig works the same way for the character, especially we use it when, let's say, character is outside and then he runs into some type of interior. Like everything okay, yeah. So like this is another example of like getting back to lighting, where we had to fake certain things. Like, 'cause like on this level, for instance, even when we tried baking stuff, considering everything is black here, like we wouldn't get much from the static lighting or from global illumination or anything like that. So like we had to use dynamic lights in here anyways. And it also actually helped in the end, because in the game, you know, like when you take the gland from the boss, the lighting changes, and like we also had to keep this in mind, that our lighting condition would like we wanted to change them during the gameplay. There was other like reason why we chose dynamic lighting, but anyways, like here it's the setup is pretty straightforward too. Like it's a skylight and directional light, and then like occasional spotlights in certain rooms, right, to make it a bit more artistic. But I'd like to fake GI a little bit. But anyways, like the main thing in here is actually the skylight, because by default, because we're using like sunset type of lighting in here, we would get this, and everything becomes like super orange, and because skylight is just taking the environment, right? And that wasn't ideal for us. Like that was not the look we were going for. And here we kind of faken it with just like specific IGR map that changes everything to look more like what we wanted it to look, right? It's so like we still get the sunrise from the sun, but everything is not overlaid with orange. And like another example would be, let's say in here, like where the difference is pretty strong, because all the materials are reflective, right? And like by default, it looks like this again. So like everything is just covered with orange color from the sun. But if you override it, we still get the orange from the sun, but we still get a lot of like colder reflections in shadowy areas, and that that just helps to make everything look more. It helps to have more creative control over there. And like if we would bake the static light skylight into the static lighting, right? It would be more challenging to do that. So that helped us a lot in this regard. And I think for the lighting, it was like mostly this. Like the most tricky part was the character lighting, but the rest was pretty simple. And we obviously didn't have like a lot of complex interiors in the game, or a lot of places where like you would go inside of the big building where there are no openings at all whatsoever. So we did like I could see this approach being problematic, because sometimes you actually have to have global illumination or some kind of that, and like you actually would want to bake lights. But for our game, like it was fine with dynamic lighting. And another quick thing I wanted to show is in regards of our character rigs, because like when Andrew was showing that animation for the spinning attack, basically I just wanted to show that even though the move looked pretty straightforward, but like in fact it did take a lot of takes to make it work, because I think the first time when we did this, I'll try to open this animation. Oh no, so this one. We did like the whole thing.
Right.
And there was just like one continuous move. And then during like when we tried to assemble that thing, we did just like started to cut those animations, and then
Right.
like we split it basically into one first part, and then the other part was just the continuation of this move, and then we would like connect them together and into a final thing. And like the same
Right.
goes. You wanted to add something, Andrew?
Oh, just like that, I remember just thinking when we had the one that was just all one, how the hell is this supposed to work?
Oh yeah. Right.
And then seeing them chopped up, it's like kind of hard to visualize how it all fits together too. So it's, yeah.
But like we would normally always do the one whole thing like all together when everything is together, and then because like it's easier to cut things from that whole animation than rather than like trying to do it in chunks from the get-go and then think like how you would assemble that. It just gives you more flexibility, and you can actually like easily cut the animation right here in Unreal. Like you can do the whole thing, quickly cut it in here, and try to implement it, and then just like if you have to still change even that like cut animation, you can still do that later in any third-party software, but at least you can quickly prototype and iterate really fast, even like within Unreal. And like the same would go about the vampire parrot attack, I think, because I can show you just quickly how many takes it actually took if I search
Yeah.
up for parrot attack.
That was the hardest. That was the hardest one. It took
Yeah.
like, I don't know how many of us were working on that for a month or two.
Yeah, and like now we would probably know more how to do these things, but when we just first approached it, like we wouldn't started from this, it's like super choppy, blocked out animations, different cuts. I think we took like insane amount of different cuts just to see what works, what doesn't, with road motion, without road motion. So
Mhm.
while we were doing this, like we would not spend all the time polishing those animations right away. Like we would just do super rough version, try to assemble it in engine, figure out what the transforms has to be for the character, for the enemy, and then like I think the final parts, like I think this is one of the examples, like when the animation is already like polished, and I think this one is used in game. It's when you miss, and
Right.
there are some like already polished when you. I think this animation is like cut by the end. The whole thing is cut into like 3 or 4 chunks that we use in the engine differently. Because like the vampire can hit you, he can miss you, he can like start chopping you down, but then you might use stone form, so we have to use something else for that scenario, or you might hit him like while he's flying into you. Like there are so many things that initially, like let's say me as an animator, like we didn't think, because like we would just do this animation and think, okay, like this is almost there, but then when we actually start diving deeper, you realize that you need so much more animations to like support it in case of this happens or that happens. Like what if your character dies when that animation is happening, or like what if you get hit when that animation happens? Like what? Like there are so many things, right? And it was definitely a lot of different takes to finally make it happen. And probably we would know more of it. Like I guess if we have to do it again, we will already know how to approach this thing at least. But at first, it was like a lot of work.
Well, Grisha went way smoother, but Grisha's easier because he doesn't fly through the air and and potentially completely miss your character, and you know any number of other things that the vampire one that can go wrong with the vampire one. But yeah, I remember when you came, you know, with that one, we like it's not like we didn't discuss. We're like, okay, paired animation, this is going to be the first one, right? But there was sort of like this conversation where you were like, dude, you just set them to the same transform. I don't know what's so hard about it.
yeah.
And we went back and forth like that for a while, and you know, and then but we were working out bugs with that like into beta even. I think into that thing was a long haul to get the vampire bite working perfectly.
And then like this is one of the examples where like you can cheat a little bit, right? Because like if you look at this is the animation when vampire attacks you as a character, and this is your response to that. But like you can clearly see that like legs are not properly animated, and some other parts are not properly animated too. But then we had a custom camera that would hide all of that, right? So like you don't have to go in and do everything perfect if nobody will see that, right? And we specifically like chose the camera. It was not like to hide things, it was more from their artistic perspective. But then whatever is not in the camera, we just didn't spend time on animating or like struggling too much about that, and that also helped us to save time. So just trying to say that like it's not that everything has to be perfect, right? And then another trick we kind of used to save some of the time, at least on some of the characters, is that actually, let's say for the character rigs, like we have a few shells, right? So they all have to use one same rig. But in fact, if I'll try to like look it up, many characters, like enemies, for instance, they use the same rig too. So if I search for Grigan, for instance, like we would be able to use enemies doing the same animations. So like if we do some animations for the enemies, we would be able to make them to be usable on the main character too. And like you probably wouldn't want to do this for attacks, for instance, right? Or for something iconic that is related only to your character. But let's say for something like deaths or some kind of run animations, like something some miscellaneous animations, you can share the same animation if you have the same rig for the enemies and for the player, and it just saves you a lot of bandwidth to work with. I don't like. I think at least like I can probably search for some other enemies, even from like Cathedral, for instance. Like they use the same skeletal rig, and it all works together, and that helped us a lot. I think I'm mostly done with my part too. So if like there are any questions, or if not, we can just move on.
All the action that we can execute in Mortal Shell much more responsive. Can you see the video?
Yes, looking good.
Okay. So here in this case, on the left, you have the input queue system disabled. On the right, it is enabled, and I am pressing the light attack button, and immediately after, I am pressing the heavy attack button. And as you can see, on the left, the character does nothing. It just goes back to the idle state, where instead on the right, I am executing a heavy attack. So this is one example. Second example, which I think is even more important. Same start, I am pressing the light attack button, and immediately after I am doing a parry. But yeah, on the left, nothing happens. The character just goes back to idle, where instead on the right, I immediately perform a parry, which in a game like this one, it's super important. Like if the parry ability is responsive. And last example, just to show that this thing is not just for strictly for combat abilities, but for anything actually. So even movement capabilities. And here I am consuming an item and then pressing the dodge button. And on the left, it's pretty evident the character just does nothing, where instead on the right, the character backsteps once the consume animation has completed. This is another example which, at least in Mortal Shell, I think it makes quite the difference, because while you consume an item in Mortal Shell, your movement capabilities are limited and your work speed is decreased. And so being able to quickly move away from, let's say, an approaching enemy, it's crucial to have a responsive combat system and movement of the player character. So moving on, returning to the engine here, another thing I want to cover is debugging. Definitely when you are dealing with a feature like this one that covers a whole combat system, you want to build some debugging tool, and I'm going to show the debug tools you want to build. Can be as simple as a widget, as I've done here. So don't look at the stuff that there is on the right. That's not related to the input queue system. It's just some data for the player character. All the related things to the input queue system are on the left. And I actually increased the text size and made the readability a little bit better for the stream. And so with this input, with this widget debug, I can actually track anything that is going on in regards to the input queuing system, because as I start attacking and like doing all sort of actions here, I get to know basically everything, all the inputs that the game has registered, and I also get to know if I was the one pressing the button with the mouse and keyboard in this case, or if it was the input queue system that took over and tried to execute the action. And here on a bit on the right, I can see the list of all the allowed inputs for this very moment, and at the bottom I can see what is the animation montage that has called the input queue master event. And so I think by doing so, by building this debug widget, we definitely save some time in testing this feature, which came pretty late during the development, and definitely it did help also with our QA team. And so the advice here is always put some effort in your debugging tools, especially when you're dealing with a feature big like this one. And so last thing I'm going to show, the input queue system. It hasn't been a complex task for me, because yeah, you saw the logic is super simple. But I want to say this: it took quite some time to complete. Oh, let me close the videos here.
Sorry, Anton. Yes, we can see you.
Okay, so yeah, this is the very first iteration of Fulgrim. Nothing, no plugins here, just engine. And yeah, as you can see, this is like the birthplace you get out of. Massive landscape. Then we have our tower with the prisoner, and then we have like different entrances to different levels. Like this is the Temple of Ash. Then there is like crypt in here. Hope it's visible. Maybe I can make the fog less dense so people can see it better. Okay, yeah. And this is a small prototype of the campfire where the brigands sit, and the spooky tree that I think Villery made that one, right?
Yeah,
at the first.
Spooky tree, yeah.
And then entrance to the cathedral. So yeah, this was how it started.
Ship it, looks perfect.
Yeah. But yeah, like answering the question, no, nothing fancy, just vanilla Unreal Engine with all the awesome toolset that they provide with that.
I remember I think we did like timed how long it takes to run to each level, and then it was like, oh, it's too small, let's make it bigger. And then when we actually started like arting out the scenes, it turned out to be like takes like 10x more times. Like, oh, that's a little too long, so I had to shorten it. So a fun back and forth.
If I can play this.
People say, is this Death Stranding?
Oh, I need to disable the messages.
People comment on bats that it's going to be a nasty enemy, but the visual factor was good anyways. Yeah. They were called like a Christmas tree decorations, and Anton made these cool animations when they like twitch their heads, and it's cool.
Yeah, it was fun, but yeah. Oh, I think there was even another version of that when we actually started to art it out a little bit, but it was still going through some iterations. Yeah, I think it's like one of the versions of the trees that were way too heavy to be shipped on anything really. But this is still like blocked out. Maybe I can again make the fog a little bit less dense. Yeah. So we would still have like this just block out of the tower, and then there is the cave where Grisha lives, as you see, just all made from BSP. And then like this area is a bit more arted out than other areas because we started from the birthplace. Essentially, I think like here is, yeah. So you can see like this actually is still in the game, and this is probably the tunnel, the really long one that I think Andrew made this one actually. goes really deep into the.
That's the one.
That's the one. That's the iconic one. That when I think we sent it to the publisher, they thought we're not serious about it. I mean, we're not, but we were.
Even I thought Andrew is not serious about it. Like, look at this. It goes so deep, you can't even see where it ends. Like, it's just.
Yeah, I was so on board. There was this whole theory how this 20-minute long crawl would be like, how you decompress from all this noisy life, how people like this this attention deficit, and people like checking this social media and everything. So this 20 minutes is what it takes to really detach from the society and everything. I was super on board with that.
Yeah, and to enter the other world, right,
Yes.
and to become familiar with the atmosphere.
When they were playing,
not everybody likes that kind of dream.
I think when we started this, we didn't have like a tutorial level at all. So like you would start in that tunnel deep over there without any hints of what to do and how to attack and whatnot. So it was a different type of different times when we had all this.
Mm-hmm. I think this is the time where I think when we did like the first few trees, and they're so dense. I think each tree is like 500,000 polygons that you obviously can have a forest with them. But I think this is where we like look at some of the references. I think Anton found this in like Washington State, this evergreen forest, like really dark, and the greens are really deep, and they're both like dark, but the saturation is really high. So we tried to kind of replicate that. I thought that would be really cool to make it feel like both scary but also kind of captivating and inviting. Like you can't really resist not like going into this kind of forest. So that was very, very cool time.
Yep. Well, I hope we answered the question.
It was fairly straightforward. It was a vanilla editor, and then here's how we did some of the work. So.
Oyunumuzun bu bölümü sona erdi. Heavy TV kanalına abone olmak için sol taraftaki simgeyi, devam bölümünü izlemek için ise sağ taraftaki simgeyi tıklayabilirsiniz. Şimdilik görüşmek üzere.